She thought she held all the power. She believed her silence could break you, that her distance would consume you from within, and that, like every other man, you would crawl back. But today, something shifted. Today, you don't react. You don't chase. You don't ask. You don't appear. And that unsettles her, because now she doesn't understand. She hates that she can't tell if you still care. She can't accept that you are no longer trapped in the game she designed. The same emptiness she once used to punish you has turned against her. And this isn't luck. This is calculated. If you're here, it's because you're exhausted. Exhausted from giving more than you ever received. Because you know you've been tested, ignored, evaluated, and you've finally chosen not to respond the way she expected. You're ready to do what most men never do, to stop explaining, stop begging, stop chasing. This isn't about manipulation. This is a guide to becoming what no one sees coming. A man who owns his presence. A man who chooses when to speak and when to disappear. A man who moves not from need, but from strength. You're about to see how silence, the same silence you once used to protect yourself, can become your sharpest weapon. How doing nothing can become so powerful that she starts questioning everything. Who are you? What did she truly feel? And why can't she stop thinking about you now? And the most powerful part? You said nothing. Because the silence you hold now isn't weakness, it's war. It's proof that not every man collapses. That one man walked away without warning and his absence spoke louder than words. So listen closely, because by the end of this, you won't just change the game. You'll play a different one entirely. One where you decide. You choose the pace. You hold the power. Before we go further, write this down in the comments. I punish with silence. Let it be seen. Let you remember it. She used the same approach she always does, slowly retreating. Her replies got slower, her tone colder, her presence less and less. It wasn't rejection. It was a calculated fade. She does this so you'll react, so you'll chase. Because in her mind, retreat always leads to one thing: your reaction. But this time, you didn't. And that one decision, not replying, not chasing, not fixing anything, rewrote the entire script. Now, she has nothing to work with. Instead of watching you beg, she watches you disappear. Instead of hearing, "Are you okay?" she hears silence. And that silence, though she'll never admit it, hits hard. Because silence breaks the pattern. She thought you'd be like the rest. The man who can't handle distance, who needs reassurance, who falls apart at the thought of losing her. But you did the one thing a woman who craves control fears most. You said nothing. You gave nothing. And in that silence, you said everything. The emptiness you leave behind is not ordinary. It's the reflection of her shrinking importance. Because silence, when used correctly, is not indifference. It's a mirror that shows her reality, that her games don't work anymore, that her moves don't affect you, that her presence no longer dictates your emotions. And for someone who needs your reaction to feel powerful, that truth is a direct hit to her ego. Now she checks her phone, watches your stories, waits for any sign that you reacted. But there's nothing, no message, no attempt, no presence. And that's when the anxiety begins. Because if you don't react, what does it mean? That you don't care? That you've moved on? That you've forgotten her? That quiet uncertainty is more powerful than anything you could have said. Now you understand. Silence is emptiness. It's provocation. It's a method, a declaration that you've stepped off her board, that she can no longer predict your next move, because the man who chooses silence becomes unpredictable. He becomes a mystery. He earns respect. And here is where it becomes fascinating. When a man holds back, she starts imagining. She fills the silence with her fears. Is he with someone else? Does he not care anymore? Did he find someone better? And the story she creates in her own mind is more brutal than any truth you could have told her. She's not wrong for thinking you're unavailable. She's wrong for thinking that makes you weaker. Because the man who doesn't beg, doesn't explain, doesn't justify, is the one who leaves the deepest mark. And now you finally understand. That silence isn't absence, it's dominance. Instead of stepping into her game, you built your own ground. A space she cannot enter, cannot control, cannot read. And that is what truly disturbs her. The not knowing. She can handle your anger. She can handle your jealousy. She can handle your questions. But your silence? There is nothing to twist. No reaction to use. No emotion to weaponize. And that is where the power begins. It's in that void where you cease to exist for her, that she starts to lose. The woman who formerly thought she could manage you with space now senses she's silently lost you, because that is your method. You depart in quiet, but the resonance of your non-presence shouts louder than any dispute. As you reconstruct your worth in seclusion, as you hone your concentration and develop emotionally, she begins to descend into a spiral where arrogance falters, aloofness loses its appeal, and the quiet you uphold guides her to one agonizing question. Did I truly lose him? That uncertainty becomes her initial penalty, and the initial motive she begins seeking you once more. Not from love, not from regret, but from necessity. She requires to feel that control again, the assurance she previously held when you would respond. She needs the solace of understanding she is still significant. But at this point, it's past time. Because what you shed in her non-presence was dependency, and what you acquired was command. Quiet turned you into an enigma, a puzzle, a silhouette she can no longer own. And in that metamorphosis, you ceased being merely one more man. You became the recollection that plagues her, the incomplete narrative she can't conclude, the man who disappeared without notice and never glanced behind. And it all started with one action, not responding. She believed she understood the game, but your quiet neutralized her. Now every action she takes is a frantic hunt for a response, and you offer none. You just leave queries, and the man who leaves queries is the one who's never overlooked. However, there is more, because now she doesn't just feel your non-presence. She analyzes it. She begins to speak about you with her companions, not as someone she forfeited, but as an enigma she could never figure out, and that is what feeds her aggravation. Because in her thoughts, you were meant to react, but you did not. Not one move, not one signal, not one communication, nothing. And that makes her frantic because she understands she no longer has entry to you. It doesn't matter how many cues she transmits, how many nuanced stories, ambiguous messages, or silent approvals, you don't get trapped by it anymore. Because you've grasped something potent. Sometimes the most forceful way to communicate is to utter nothing at all. Quiet has an odd way of functioning. It doesn't yell. It doesn't proclaim its arrival. It doesn't require focus. It just appears, silently, and once it is present, it starts to alter everything surrounding it. Not aggressively, but slowly. Unseen. Fatally. Because what commences as separation soon develops into an emotional fissure. Initially, she doesn't perceive it. She still thinks she's in command. She assures herself your non-presence is momentary, that you're merely performing, that you'll return any second. But time elapses, and you do not return. And something inside her starts to shake. Her reasoning begins to falter. Because in her thoughts, you ought to be pursuing, you ought to be inquiring what failed, you ought to be attempting to mend what you shared, but you are not. And that quiet, that absence of response, doesn't just perplex her, it enrages her. Because if you're not responding as she anticipated, then what does that define you as? What sort of man are you? You are the one she cannot manage, the one who doesn't require her focus, the one who moves on and never glances behind. That figure she once believed she could decipher now eludes her completely. You have become erratic, unmanageable, unreadable. And that is when she begins to spin. First gradually, then more rapidly, because she must know. She must reclaim the point of reference you demolished without speaking a single word. Your quiet made you a menace, not because you wounded her, but because you fractured the pattern. And everything that fractures the pattern becomes hazardous to those who resided comfortably within it. You ceased being the man who adhered to the template. You became the enigma, and enigmas always generate fixation. She starts recalling you at the most unforeseen times, during an engagement, prior to sleeping, when she views your name absent notifications, when she inspects your profile and discovers no sign of you whatsoever, because all that you previously were has dissolved. And now, just the silhouette lingers, the silhouette of the man who never returned. And the worst part for her isn't that you departed, it's that she never anticipated it. Her whole psychological contest was founded upon your responses, your agitation, your dependency, your emotional templates. But now, she has nothing. She can't forecast you. She can't manage you. She can't even discern if you still mind, or if you've already wiped her completely. And that quiet you maintain, it isn't vacancy, it's turmoil. Emotional turmoil for her. Strategic calm for you. Because deep inside, you know precisely what you're doing. You're not being inactive, you're being methodical. Every quiet holds purpose. You don't message because you don't have to. You don't answer because she's no longer of first concern. You don't come back because your non-presence communicates louder than anything you could possibly state. Your quiet isn't apathy. It's creation. You're not responding, you're constructing. Constructing self-control, constructing enigma, constructing power. And she senses it. She senses that something has changed, that you no longer circle around her influence, that your wavelength has altered. While she's still pursuing affirmation, you've become unattainable. Because her focus no longer sways you, her conduct no longer guides you, her trials no longer characterize you. And that is the genuine triumph. When the contest she started no longer involves you, but stay alert. Because this is the point most men falter. When she begins displaying cues, a text, an offhand "how are you?", an approval, a story shared just for you to notice, they get elated. They believe it's her comeback, that the quiet succeeded, that they've triumphed. But that's the snare. She doesn't return for you. She returns for resolution. She returns because she cannot abide the ambiguity, because her pride requires affirmation. And if you respond, if you answer too fast, if you display feeling, you ruin everything you constructed. Your quiet isn't merely a tactic. It's a barrier that safeguards your advancement, that reminds her she no longer has entry without clearance. And only if she attempts to scale that barrier, with resolution, with modesty, with sincere purpose, then you determine whether to open even the tiniest gap. Because in this quiet contest, it was never about prompting her return. It's about guaranteeing you never forfeit yourself again. That's what this is entirely about, grasping that your vitality is not a present for the unappreciative, that your moments are precious, that your value doesn't hinge on answers, affirmation, or attendance, that your voice possesses far more influence when you understand when to remain quiet. And as you ascend, as you operate in quiet and reconstruct, she begins to break down, because she cannot grasp how she forfeited everything without a confrontation, without a farewell, without one single word. There was only quiet, and her world crumbled. That is the type of power that cannot be instructed in words, only demonstrated through actions, through choices, through non-appearances that carry more weight than appearance. And she senses it. Deep inside, she knows it. She lost a man who didn't merely depart. She lost the one man who understood how to move on without a sound, because the one who remains to dispute is simple to decipher. The one who gets irate, who protests, who weeps, is still present. But you disappeared, without yelling, without clarifying, without pleading. And that imprinted on her. Now she replays the instances in her thoughts, seeking indications that you did something improper. But she discovers nothing. Because the issue was never you. The issue was presuming you'd never depart. And now, you didn't just depart, you departed altered, more distant, more resolute, more liberated. And that, even if she never concedes it, plagues her. Because you no longer require her to come back. And when you no longer require, everything either arrives on its own or it doesn't. It is irrelevant. The human psyche cannot abide a void. It must fill the emptiness to complete the narrative, to find meaning in what was forfeited. And when you moved on, when you ceased answering, when you vanished in quiet, you fashioned precisely that, a void. But this wasn't just any void. It wasn't apathy. It wasn't lack of interest. It was something far more profound. A non-presence with purpose. And that type of non-presence, when carried out with method, doesn't sting at first. It perplexes. It unnerves. Then it stings. And after that, it preoccupies. She starts to exist with a query she cannot resolve. Why? Why didn't he return? Why didn't he respond? Why didn't he persist? And that's where uncertainty is conceived, a silent, treacherous kind of uncertainty that doesn't yell, but doesn't allow her to rest either. Because what agonizes her most isn't that you departed. It's that she cannot grasp why you didn't come back. In her thoughts, she's witnessed this narrative previously. She understands how it's meant to conclude. You pleading, you persisting, you attempting to mend everything. But not this instance. This instance, the conclusion was different. This instance, there was no conclusion, no resolution, only quiet. A quiet that continues to broaden, extending like a silhouette through her ideas, transforming every recollection of you into an unresolved query. And the psyche cannot abide unresolved queries. She starts to scrutinize every fine point. The final communication, the final glance, the final day you conversed. She hunts for hints. Was it her error? Did you state something? Did she overlook a cue? But she discovers nothing. And that neutralizes her entirely. Because if she can't pinpoint what severed the link, she starts to believe maybe the issue was her. Maybe you were too restrained. Maybe she was insufficient. And that notion, that nuanced self-doubt, is the toxin your quiet instilled. Without one single word, your quiet becomes her internal adjudicator. And abruptly, you're no longer just the man who departed. You're the man who, through his non-presence, compelled her to confront what she never wished to perceive about herself. That she's not as enduring in memory as she presumed, not as exceptional as she trusted, not as singular as her pride made her feel. Because you didn't depart with commotion, you departed with refinement. And that alters everything. The men who create spectacles, who protest, who dispute, they offer her something to contend against. But you did not. You didn't contend. You merely departed. And that type of departure cannot be handled. That's when her thoughts begin to fabricate narratives. He must be with another. Maybe I never counted. Maybe I was the one who spoiled everything. The uncertainty starts as a murmur, but with time it evolves into a yell she cannot hush. She starts hunting for you. Without conceding, she's hunting. She views your profile, scans through your pictures, studies your stories, looks for indications of someone new, studies comments, watches everything, but communicates nothing. Because her arrogance won't permit her to inquire. But her psyche is already in conflict. And in that conflict, you do nothing. You transmit no cues, you leave no signs, you display no feeling. That self-control, that tranquility, shatters her. Because she's always derived influence from her appearance. But you've instructed her something she'll never overlook. That genuine influence resides in non-presence. And the more time elapses, the more her internal strain intensifies. The more she must know. the more she questions everything she once felt assured about. Now she doesn't know if you'll ever come back. She doesn't know if she ever genuinely possessed you. She doesn't even know if she forfeited something she ever truly prized. And that's where the transformation commences. She alters, from aloof to curious, from managing to insecure, from self-assured to perplexed. Because now, the whole mental model she once deployed on you no longer functions. And that renders her susceptible. And in that susceptibility, you ascend. Because while she's emotionally fracturing, you're advancing psychologically. You seem more formidable, more defined, more beyond reach. And in her thoughts, that verifies her profoundest dread, that you've entirely lost concern. The paradox is harsh. The more she disregarded you previously, the more she craves you now that she can't possess you. That's what uncertainty does. That's what quiet does. That's what a man does when he understands when to remain quiet. And the most captivating part is, she still doesn't realize. She doesn't realize whether this was a tactic or if you genuinely cease to care. But that ambiguity, that gray transitional area, is what devours her. Because if she at least realized you were wounded, she'd realize there's still something to mend. If she realized you were irate, she'd possess an emotion to engage with. But there's nothing, only quiet, and assurance. The assurance that you no longer participate in her contest. The assurance that, whether she concedes it or not, you've already triumphed. And there, in the tempest you fashioned by departing silently, a new existence is born for her. That not all men are identical. That some, like you, understand how to move on with influence, without phrases, without commotion, without hunting for affirmation. And a man like that is never overlooked. Because there arrives a moment, a critical moment, where everything alters, where she ceases awaiting cues and starts hunting for them, where she's no longer attempting to manage the narrative, she's attempting to grasp it, where her uncertainties begin to shift into action. That point comes when your non-presence becomes intolerable, when your quiet ceases being simple separation and transforms into actuality, when it's no longer that you're not communicating, it's that you're genuinely absent, not on her display, not in her communications, not in her existence. And for someone who once subsisted on your focus, that is the genuine impact. She alters from observing you to longing for you, from managing to desiring you, from trifling to entreating. She won't express it directly. Her arrogance still restrains her, but the fissures begin to appear. An offhand communication, a harmless remark veiled as apathy, a recollection tossed into the ether. Today I went past the location we visited. I listened to that track you often played. Do you recall? It all seems guiltless, but it's not. Every phrase she transmits is burdened with a purpose she won't concede. She wants to reclaim what she forfeited without overtly acknowledging it. She wants to return, but without descending from her platform. But you're not present anymore. You're no longer the man who requires affirmation. You're no longer awaiting that communication. You no longer inspect her profile, because you altered too. Your quiet wasn't merely a tactic. It was a metamorphosis, a shift from a man who was emotionally vulnerable to a man who became emotionally shielded. And she can sense it. She perceives it. In your tranquility, in your absence of response, in the manner you converse, in the manner you behave, in how now you are the one dictating the conditions. And she senses it. And it stings. Because the contest is no longer hers. She might attempt to return, but now there are no assurances. She doesn't know if you'll answer, if you're still accessible, if that communication will even be noticed. And that apprehension devours her, because you've shifted from being her assurance to being her ambiguity. And in romance, ambiguity is compelling. Now she's the one scrutinizing every phrase, interpreting between every line, asking if she's proceeding correctly, questioning if she forfeited something she can never retrieve. And perhaps she did. Because the man who mastered remaining quiet also mastered heeding his own value. He mastered the distinction between what thrills him and what is beneficial for him. He mastered prioritizing himself. And for a man who once gauged his value through how others responded, that's sheer progress. You no longer hunger for focus. You no longer hunt for affirmation. You're no longer ensnared. Now, you possess control. And in that control, you determine whether to answer or not, to unlock the entrance or keep it shut, to permit her entry or persist in moving ahead. Because when she starts to entreat, you're no longer entreating for anything. That's genuine non-attachment. When the chance comes back and you're no longer intrigued, and that's the distinction between the man who mastered and the man who only feigned being all right. The one who feigned crumbles when she comes back. He hurries, he answers, he takes remnants, but not you. You're no longer that man. You're not awaiting affirmation. You're selecting tranquility. You're selecting concentration. You're selecting progress. Because during this whole ordeal, while she was trifling with your focus, you were constructing your psyche, constructing your concentration, constructing your objectives. And now it is evident. She can perceive it in your gaze, in your vitality, in the manner you no longer attempt to be an element of her existence, because you've constructed your own. And that existence no longer requires her attendance to possess value. And that makes her frantic, because she presumed she could return any time she desired. She presumed that just appearing would make everything circle around her once more, but not this instance. This instance, you mastered the lesson. This instance, you selected influence. You selected reverence. You selected self-worth. And that's what makes her, for the initial time, sense what you once sensed: self-doubt. She doesn't know if she's forfeiting her final opportunity. She doesn't know if you're with another. She doesn't know if you still recall her, or if you've already ceased. And that mental tempest compels her to act, occasionally with a direct communication, occasionally with a veiled apology, occasionally with a direct invitation. But now, it's past time. Because you grasped something crucial. When someone forfeits you by depreciating you, they don't merit retrieving you out of ease. That type of return isn't taken. It's just watched from a distance. And here's the transformation. Now she's in your position. She's the one inspecting her device, awaiting a cue, forming mental strategies, gauging the ideal instant to connect. Because the quiet you once deployed as a defense now presses on her as a penalty. Everything has altered. Now she's the one pursuing. She's the one awaiting. She's the one who doesn't grasp what transpired. And you're simply all right. That's how you grow beyond reach. Not because you don't sense. Not because you don't care. Not because you're forged from rock. But because you mastered what most men never do. That you don't have to pursue to possess value. That you don't need attendance to maintain influence. She presumed she could manage it. She presumed you'd return. She presumed this was momentary. But it was not. Because your quiet wasn't rash. It was measured. It was a choice. A statement of emotional sovereignty. A deed of self-reverence. And now observe you. You're no longer in conflict with yourself. You no longer ask what you did improperly. You no longer await her communication. You no longer inspect her profile. Because you don't require any of that any longer. While she was hunting for focus, you discovered purpose. And that's genuine influence. The influence to vanish without animosity. To remain quiet without forfeiting self-worth. To not come back. And not lament it. And that type of influence can never be overlooked. She might persist in hunting for you in recollections. She might try to reconnect with gentle phrases. She might even murmur that she misses you, but you'll realize something she never did. That genuine influence isn't located in what you contend to retain, but in what you determine to release. And you released. You released with dignity. You released with refinement. You released with fortitude. And that's why now you're something different. You're not merely an ex. You're not merely another choice. You're the man who signified a before and after. While others trifle with feelings, you're constructing your domain. This channel, Scientia, is not for those who hunger for focus. It's for those who hunger for influence, self-command, foresight, strategic detachment. And if you've reached this point, it's not by chance. It's because you're prepared. Prepared to continue advancing. Prepared to discard what doesn't aid you. Prepared to become the type of man no one considers losing. Prepared to make the next move. So now, state below, I am beyond reach. Scribe it, declare it, embody it, because that's what you are, from this point forward. And if you wish to continue traversing this route, if you wish for deeper, more private, more tactical content, enlist as a channel member. Subscribe at this time. Distribute this video. And remain resolute, because she knows it, and you know it as well. Now, you possess the control. Yes,